If you're anywhere near the world of IVF, you've probably heard this. Just a confusing alphabet soup of tests, right? You've got PGT-A, PGT-M, and now these two new ones are popping up, PGT-P and PGT-G. Honestly, it can feel totally overwhelming. But figuring out what they actually do, that's so important. So let's dive in and see if we can solve this puzzle together. And it really all comes down to this one question. This is the question that's at the heart of so many people's fertility journeys. You do everything by the book, you get what everyone calls a genetically normal or euploid embryo, and then nothing. It just doesn't lead to a pregnancy. It's this heartbreaking mystery that has so many patients, and doctors too, just searching for answers. Well, a really powerful new technology is starting to be applied to this problem, and it's called whole genome sequencing. You'll hear it called WGS. And it's a pretty revolutionary approach that's letting scientists look so much deeper into an embryo's genetics than they ever could before. To really get this, think of an embryo's DNA as its personal instruction manual. Now, the tests we've had for a while, like the common PGT-A test, were great at making sure all the chapters, the chromosomes, were there. But whole genome sequencing, WGS, reads the entire book word for word from cover to cover. It gives us a level of detail that is just completely unprecedented. But here's where it gets really interesting. The idea of reading the whole book is the same, but how different labs are processing and interpreting all that information has led to two completely different tests. So it's the exact same technology, but it's being used to answer two very, very different questions. A real fork in the road. And that brings us to our two main paths. You've got PGT-P on one side and PGT-G on the other. They both spring from that same core technology, but as we're about to see, their goals are worlds apart. Okay, so here's the fundamental split. PGT-P is all about looking forward. It's trying to predict the future risk of some complex diseases. PGT-G, on the other hand, is looking backward. It's trying to explain past implantation failures. And as you can see, one of them is stirring up a ton of controversy, while the other one, well, it's been quietly gaining support in the medical community. So let's start with the test that's been making all the headlines, the one you might have heard about, PGT-P. So here's the deal with PGT-P. It takes embryos that are already known to be chromosomally normal and then adds this whole other layer of analysis. It basically grades them, giving each one a score based on its statistical risk for developing complex conditions like diabetes or schizophrenia way down the line. But this has led to a lot of controversy, with some really bold marketing and these designer baby headlines that have made a lot of folks in the medical world pretty uncomfortable. And that discomfort, it's official. The American Society for Reproductive Medicine, ASRM, recently put out a guideline on PGT-P, and they specifically warned about, and I'm quoting here, the absence of scientific evidence behind such big promises being made by the companies that are pioneering this test. And, here's the fundamental scientific problem for PGT-P. For so many of these complex diseases, genetics are only one part of the story. So, for example, an embryo might have a higher genetic risk for something like type 1 diabetes, but the disease itself is often triggered by an environmental factor, like a virus. A gene test has no way of predicting that kind of exposure, which makes offering any kind of guarantee basically impossible. Okay, so now let's switch gears and look at that other path. While PGT-P was getting all this media attention, a totally different application of whole genome sequencing, PGT-G, has been quietly getting more and more traction as the evidence for it starts to build. See, PGT-G isn't trying to be a crystal ball. It's trying to solve a problem that's happening right now. Its goal is to hunt for specific, single-gene variants that are known to be associated with infertility or with recurrent pregnancy loss or implantation failure, variants that, in many cases, are just incompatible with life. The whole point is to find answers and, as some doctors put it, to reduce the time to baby. But, and this is a really crucial detail, that term whole genome sequencing can be a bit misleading. Some labs might say they're doing WGS, but they might only be analyzing a tiny fraction of the genome, like maybe 1,800 genes out of a possible 25,000. A test is only as good as its analysis, so it's so important to understand what's actually being looked at. So all this theory is one thing, but how does this actually play out in the real world? Let's take a look at a clinical example that really shows the potential power of PGT-T. Just look at that number, 23. That's what makes this case so striking. We're talking about a 23-year-old patient. She was young, she was healthy, she had a high ovarian reserve. Having recurrent IVF failure at that age is it's highly unusual, and it's incredibly frustrating for both the patient and her doctors. So what happened? Well, after 4 failed transfers, her doctors decided to try something new, a PGT test on her next round of embryos. And the result was a total shock. It didn't find a typical infertility gene. Instead, it found a variant for something called familial hypercholesterolemia. When they checked the medical literature, they found this specific variant was highly associated with implantation failure. This made them check her lipids, and her cholesterol was, as her doctor said, through the roof, something you would never think to test in a healthy 23-year-old. And just like that, they had a real actionable plan. And that is the key here. For so long, when a healthy embryo failed, everybody's focus immediately shifted to the uterus. But in this case, the PGT-T tests gave them a definitive answer that was inside the embryo itself. It completely changed the direction of their investigation and, more importantly, her treatment. Okay, wow. We have covered a lot of ground, so let's pull all this together. What are the most important things to take away from all this? Let's just boil it all down with this simple little cheat sheet. PGT-P is all about predicting future risk. It's asking which one of these healthy embryos is statistically better for the long run. PGT-G, on the other hand, is about explaining past failure. It's asking why didn't the other transfers work, and can we find a specific genetic reason? So, to put it as simply as possible, PGT-P is about future risk, and it is still very controversial. PGT-D is a diagnostic tool for past failure, and the evidence for it is growing. The most important thing here for you is to empower yourself. When you hear about any new genetic test, always ask the tough questions. What is this test actually looking for? And what's the scientific proof that it really works? You know, this technology is opening up the instruction manual of human life in ways we have never seen before. It's giving us this incredible, sometimes overwhelming amount of information. As we keep learning, the fundamental challenge isn't just going to be about the science, but about our values. And that leaves all of us with a pretty critical question to think about.